Thanks, everyone. Just a little bit in terms of introduction. I'm Matt Fuller. I've been in the fort for about a little over 11 years now. I live in Tower Barracks East. And during our home tour, I was one of the stops. And in my kitchen, I met Carole English. And Carole mentioned, I used to work in this building. I had started working in the kitchen buildings and then moved across to the barracks buildings back when they were administration centers. And I was very happy to turn it over to Carole at that point and have her tell us some stories there as part of the home tour. And since then, we've gotten to know Carole a lot better. She works with the Historical Society now, and she's got some great stories to tell, and we're very much looking forward to it. You can't have a fireside chat without a fire, so let's get the fire burning. I have some pictures up there so we can flip back and forth. There's some buildings and some people I might put up there depending on which way the stories go today. So I do have some notes, and I'm going to start just by asking Carole, can you tell us please a little bit about what you did when you were at the fort and what you did while you were here, please?
I was in the Army. I was in the Army from 1963 to 1966. I came to Fort Sheridan in 1964. I worked in the finance office and I worked in the accounting office. And basically my duties were just like any accounting person, recording records, paying bills, paying travel allowances, and paying for operation and maintenance of the Army and for commercial vendors. I worked there for, like I said, until 1966. I was discharged from the Army in 66. I worked briefly in the private sector. I came back in 1967 as a civilian, and I came back to my old job, this time as a civilian, and I paid accounts payable for commercial vendors. I worked there for a while. Then when I worked in what we call quality assurance, so I got to do the operations maintenance review of the office. I took time off because of an illness in my family. My mother was ill, so I took a break from civil service, came back in 1989 as a buyer for the post engineers. That was the most beneficial experience in my life because it got me into real estate, housing, contracting, and also accounting. Then they announced the base would close. So that got me transferred to Ohio. One of the things that was good was that the experience that I obtained at Fort Sheridan worked well and translated well into the civilian workforce, so I was grateful for that. One of the interesting things about Ohio was they were changing the government structure. A lot of things that could have been done by commercial vendors, they outsourced it and they streamlined. So the big contracts now, they're partnered with the government, so there's a branch now called MOCAS, which is Mechanization of Contract Administrative Services. So that's what happened. And that was it. And I did work for the state in the Department of Employment Security. And what I did do was become what they call an adjudicator. I adjudicated claims for people that were discharged, what they call major adjudication. And that was reviewing the cases, why people were fired, making sure that they were in compliance with Department of Labor laws. And that's briefly what I've done with my life.
Wow, that's a long list. When you first I should tell the audience, we've brought in Carole a couple of times to talk to her. So a lot of the things we're going to be asking today are stories that Carole's already told. I may ask her to repeat some of those, but that's sort of where some of my notes came from. And one of the things that occurred to me right from the beginning was, when I think of life on an Army base, I never think of financials or ordering or the HR aspect of it. So I tend to think of sort of the military aspect. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the people you worked with and some of the departments you worked with specifically while you were doing your various positions?
Some of the departments I worked with would be military pay and that is payroll. Basically, when you're paying people, you're under payroll laws. So, although it's the Army and you have your benefits and your scales, you go to their regulations, but you're still doing those same duties. Another aspect is I did some work in dispersing. That was the one that's the quick route to jail, because you're dealing with cash and checks, and people sometimes do not understand you gotta lock government checks up, and that is very nerve-wracking. Also cash, I did that working as a teller. Then I did travel pay and allowances, and this is paying for your travel expenses that people get to incur when they're going to a different duty station, their family, paying for that, paying for local travel for expenses that are reimbursable doing government business. And again, the accounts payable aspect, paying for commercial services. Finally, I wound up being in what they call quality control or quality assurance, and that is doing the monthly operations report, checking the different sections in the office to see that they are functioning correctly. Also, the special interest of the finance officer. And special interest, when you do that, is that somebody has requested the finance officer do a report and somebody is not performing their job on post-handling government funds. So that is basically what I was doing with that. And then again, if he had a special concern with certain aspects of money being paid, those special studies I did.
You mentioned too that you worked with the engineering group.
And with the engineering group, that was the last assignment. And basically this was for facilities engineers and housing. And basically I would be purchasing supplies, services, and for warehouse and for family housing. And that would be, again, that would be the contracting side. This time, instead of paying, I was ordering. And one of the things that I did when base closure came, they put me into an administrative position. So I was the administrative assistant for the director of engineering. And that was interesting because that got me more involved with the local communities, because we had Desert Storm, and we had to buy supplies from the local communities. And what had happened when Desert Shield turned into Desert Storm, this is when the railroads opened up and you could see the railroad tracks and the supplies being boarded. And that was going from Fort Sheridan to Great Lakes. And this is when I realized how awesome Fort Sheridan was. And to even get from my home, which was in Waukegan, to Fort Sheridan, took about 2 hours because that's how backed up the trains were and the traffic was.
The other thing that we talked a little bit about was just the issue of life on a military base in general. And you talked a lot about some of the things that people did just for entertainment and for families.
Yes. Fort Sheridan was a very good post as far as having facilities. I brought some pictures there, and it was a home away from home. You had the PX, the commissary, and they had what they call the service club. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Army Service Club. It was for the morale support of military people. And I had worked for the Army Service Club, and that was to support activities for military. And basically we would have different programs, we have different communities come in to support the troops. Also, they had a good sports program, and so I was on the volleyball team on that, and we did win the 5th Army Championship, and we traveled around 5th Army. And of course, when I was doing my research, that's the one picture I could not find of me, but it was in the tower, and I had given that to my mother. And that was wonderful because we were out in Colorado, and it was beautiful out there. And I wanted to, like I told my mother, I'd like to bring her out there. That was great. And we had a ceremony, and basically one of the traditions was that the trophy was presented to the post commander, so that was a big treat for me. Then there were ghost stories I think we wanted to go through. And this one, the ghost stories that we experienced, I was working for the finance office, and what we did a lot of times was when we had material or supplies that were not used by one activity or one office, they would transfer. So we got our, they were cabinets. And so we got the cabinets from Building 81, which was the Chicago Recruiting Battalion at that time. And they sent the files to us. And we were sitting up there, and I was with my boss, and we were looking at it, and we were trying to figure out where they went. And all of a sudden, the doors started coming open and shut, open and shut. And we looked at each other, and we said, nah.
I love that story. We're going to be using that in about a month when we do the ghost stories again this year. And I put some pictures up while you were speaking.
Oh, yes.
This one was Building 142, the building that got the haunted filing cabinets.
Right. And that's the north end of it. And this what you're looking at, that was the end that I actually worked in. It was the finance office, and it was 3 stories high. So basically, it was a big building, and it housed transportation, the administrative headquarters for engineering, and then the contracting office, and then what we would call the IT people, and then downstairs in the basement was the communication center. So it was a big building, and then on the south end of the building was military personnel. And that was a huge building, but that was where I used to work.
Excuse me, is this building still here, and if so, what is it?
She asked, is the building still here? And if so, what is it doing now?
Okay, no, the building is not here. And I came up here with a friend back in about 2005, and this is when it was raised and it was gone. And we were shocked because we thought it was going to be preserved, because there was a rumor mill that maybe they would keep the building, but it was on Patton Road. It's gone.
So I did a little searching. It looks like it's where the fenced-in area is right now. It's roughly in that, it would have been in that area. Wanted to mention, one of the things that we noticed with Carole very early is that whenever she refers to buildings, she never refers to them as the Tower Barracks or the Artillery Barracks. She always talks about building numbers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that was how, basically, with the military, that's how they identify the buildings. And I think the one thing is it's for reporting purposes, because basically they know that the activities will change. But that building is part of the government's inventory. And one of the things, I don't know how true it is, the buildings are not in any particular sequence, and that's probably why it's so hard. And the reason I do it is because I know where I was in 1970s and 1990. But this has been reconstructed, and it's so pretty, and the houses are gone. So basically, that's how I know to get my direction. I know where it was, and then I can do that. So right now, what I'm doing, I'm learning, and usually I say, oh yes, this is a building. And when I do that, it's also a resource for me, because when I say building 81, they tell me what 81 is now, and that's how I tie the two together. So I'm learning now to speak the new language.
And I appreciate that too. Coming on to the Historic Society, one of my biggest challenges when I do tours is trying to tell people what the buildings are called and what they used to do, because so many of the buildings had so many functions. And at the beginning, I wasn't so sure that I needed to learn those numbers. I need to learn those numbers because that's important.
Yes.
So speaking of which, since we are, one of the things that we do here at the Historical Society a lot is those tours. may I put some pictures up of some of our buildings, and can you tell us what happened in those buildings when you were here? Would you mind that?
Okay, that building is the rear entrance to the hospital, and that would be, that was the education center. That's what it was used for when I was here. And that door is the upstairs to it. And also, when I first came here, there's a part of the building that they had sectioned off. It was the hospital, and it was like a surgery room. So they closed that, but it was still available and they showed it to me when I was being oriented. So basically, when you see that, that's the education center, and then also it was the medical building, which would be the dental clinic, and then there was a regular clinic and a pharmacy.
And one of the reasons I put this up toward the front is this building is also no longer standing.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say one thing about that. And the name of the hospital was the Lovell Hospital.
Yes.
Lovell.
And it was named after the Army Surgeon General. So you had an Army Surgeon General named Lovell. Now there's the FHCC, the Federal Healthcare Center, which is the VA North Chicago. That's called the Captain James A. Lovell Healthcare Center. And that's named after the astronaut James A. Lovell from the Navy. Two different people, unrelated and separated by decades.
So on the screen now is the bachelor's officers' quarters. So basically, if you went outside and looked straight across, you would see this building.
But when I was here, that was just for quarters.
BOQ. BOQ.
BOQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, BOQ. And what had happened, what is now the commander's residence for functions and for officers' functions, that's what they were using it for. And the awning was there, and I think that was the former commander's house. But basically, hail and farewell services were there, retirement for officers was there. Civilians were allowed for functions, and it was a kind of pecking order thing. You had to be what they call a GS7 and above to get into the officers club. And when you did have a hail and farewell, it kind of, what was interesting is everybody was kind of gathered according to their rank. And I don't know if people do this intuitively or not, but you could just see that the officers and the high ups would be socializing and the lower level people would be sitting down in a corner. And I don't know, it was impressive. The building was impressive, and it was just, sometimes they would have different major events there. And they used the Officers Club as a general fundraising enterprise, I guess.
I have a great shot of the inside of the gym, since
That-
we've talked about this
yes.
already.
This was the post gym, and this is where indoors they had parades there. And I looked and found the dimensions, and I think they said that that's 24,732 square feet. And it is huge. And this is where I played volleyball. I'm looking at that and I'm tired already. But when I was younger, I was game for it, and they had different sports tournaments there. But basically, this is where, if the weather was inclement, it was a retirement ceremony, it could house people, and they could do that. So I had marched there many a time when it was indoors.
In Carole's honor, I put all the building numbers in parentheses on here.
Yes, so
And that's down, that's not here.
That's the
Still
drill
here.
hall.
It's just a drill hall.
Drill hall.
Oh, it is. Is
Former
that
drill hall,
big? Is
turned
that-
to turned to gymnasiums. Yeah.
Oh, split now, but yeah.
I think that's
Have you ever
the,
been?
yes,
yeah, that would be the exterior.
There it is.
We're
That's what
hoping
it
for
was.
a house tour there.
And then, of course, I have to ask about because this is where I live, the Tower Barracks. What were the Tower Barracks used for when you were here?
the tower barracks were used for administrative offices. When I was here as a military, this was where the transportation, procurement, and supply were. And they were in that building across from, well, that was just, that. Across, I think it was the kitchen, and you looked at that was where I worked at, and that was where the finance building was, along with the judge advocate's office. So, yeah, and that's how I would walk from building 81 to go to work, and that's the perfect where it is, and that's it.
The reason I use this photo right now, this is where the garages are. So if you're walking past, it used to be an alleyway. This is where I park my car now.
Yeah.
It's been built in, and we have patios on top of that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to ask about my building. Would anyone else here like to ask about their building when Carole was here, what it was being used for?
The stables.
The stables were used for operation and maintenance and for repair shops when I was here. So basically, yeah. And they would be open and you could see the trucks and whatnot being repaired there, yeah.
Just wondering about the stockade building, what was that used for?
The
I
stock.
assume it was not an active jail at that time.
No, the stockade, when I first came, they did have prisoners. Then it changed to the Post Museum,
Oh,
because the museum was in the tower, then from the tower they moved it to where the stockade is.
okay.
Carole, I happened to find this particular picture.
Yeah.
It looks like this may be when it was the museum because there are some
Yes,
vehicles sitting outside.
and that's the museum.
Oh, interesting.
And the cannons. That were
Oh yeah, there's
also
cannons
over.
and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
tank and some gun
Yeah.
vehicles.
Carole, can you tell us about getting the statue of
Yes.
Sheridan at the flagpole?
Yes, I was working with the engineers at that time, and it was in the late afternoon, and this truck pulls up with something all wrapped up in, looking like the mummy of the picture. And it was just these two arms, and that was it. And they told us what it was. It was the statue of Bill Sheridan. And it traveled across country in a regular truck. And that was it, just open. I just couldn't imagine because it did not look like a statue.
Was it assembled at all, or was
Yeah, it was assembled. The body was, what they hadn't put in there was the flag that he was carrying. There was some assembly required, and I think the one thing that was amazing was that I remember they had to have some work done on it, and there was a letter that one of the shop people said that the statue needed a repair and they wanted to get some material. And then he said they needed the material for the horses.
Where did the statue come from, if you know?
Well, basically, I don't know where it came from, but the sculptor was Noble. And I didn't meet him, but I had seen him around. But so he was here for the a ceremony when they did unveil it and they got it assembled to its present location.
About what year was that?
That was 1990, I want to say 1992. Yeah, around there. Was
It
it?
was fairly new.
Yeah, so, because as I said, I knew it was in the 90s and it was just before the base closed.
You can look up lawrencenoble.com. We did find him online. He's still doing sculpting and lives in California currently. So.
And that was where, probably, and yeah, I knew it was out west, and that was just one of the reasons why it made it here safely.
We did have a request from one of our board members too, if you could talk a little bit about the airstrip while you were here. This is a picture from 1970s, an overhead map picture of the airstrip.
With the airstrip, one of the things that they did have was the Golden Knights here, and they would have, and there would be ceremonies, and they would jump from there, and I cannot remember too much anything else other than that, but that was the biggie.
Hey, there was an article in the local newspaper when the military built that airstrip. It had
broken 200 federal laws because there was a high bluffs, and at the end of the runway was a heavily populated area. So it did make the local news, and you know how the Army and the government kind of screwed up on that one.
Not to mention there was a shooting range that went
Yes,
across
that's-
as well.
Oh my gosh.
You mentioned that whoever the commander of the base was seemed to set the tone. And this is a person you talked a lot about.
That is Colonel Leonard. And Colonel Leonard was very involved with his personnel, both military and civilian. The human side is that he wanted us, and he always encouraged, you'll never be treated as second-class citizens, because he knew that a lot of sacrifices for public service people didn't always understand. And he did have, and I did find a paper by him. I didn't make a copy of it, but it was his program where he signed it. Also, when he retired, he worked for the Bank of Highland Park. And he was an officer there, and he would be out there greeting people. And when I bought my first car, I was talking to the banker, and he said, I gotta take this to the colonel, he said, because he really said, any people from Fort Sheridan, if they work for Fort Sheridan, I want to make sure that they're treated well. And I appreciated that, because so many times when people are bosses, they don't take the time out. And this only just proved to me that, or showed me that he was very committed to doing and making sure that his people were treated well. And additionally, when I talked to the guy who was a banker, he said, please let me go get him, because he means that. And that I thought was just wonderful. And as I said, he really took his people and their welfare at his heart. Okay.
Something else you mentioned in our previous talk was something that I had never thought about, how Fort Sheridan was sort of a center for technology at the time, and all the most recent things. There was, of course, the Nike missiles were here.
The Nike missiles were here, and when Fort Sheridan was changing, also we were getting the new system. They were doing it. They had the IT system there. So basically, we were kind of setting the tone for the new generation. And one of the things that was really great was with the streamlining and whatnot. I had a finance officer who was ahead of his time, and there was one section in accounting that was trying to pay. And he said, no, I want this down in this section because they're more disciplined to do that. And when they brought that down into my section at that time, that helped. And also when we were going through, we were getting a lot of changes, or what they call technical messages. So we were the first ones to implement the new systems. And when I did go out to Ohio, they told me when I left Ohio, take this work with you. I don't know, it's yours. I wrestled with it for a long time, because actually what they did do was improve the functionality between the different departments. And that was bringing the Department of Air Force, Navy, Army, and Coast Guard together with the functional code that integrated the systems. So it's now called Standard Redesign, Standard Army Accounting Redesign #1. And that was one of the things that I was proud about, because it was good to be part of that experience. And going through it, it was challenging, but at least you can say that you did something besides sit at a desk.
Something else, I would be absolutely remiss if I did not talk a little bit about the wax with you. And I understand from the history, the Fort Sheridan was one of the first military bases that had wax on the base. And you know a little bit about the history, and I would love if you could share some of that information.
Yes, well, the history, we didn't have that many wax physically up Fort Sheridan, but the history of the Women's Army Corps, they started out as an auxiliary corps, I think, and that's kind of what a lot of people I'm finding out are familiar with. But in 1943, it became a regular Army Corps, giving women full benefits. A lot has changed since then. The first thing was that I was fortunate enough, the women that were at Fort Sheridan in the Army, we were fortunate to be in the technical field. So you had people like myself in finance, personnel, medical profession, and so those three were great. And the atmosphere was good, and we got a chance to interact with the community, because basically one of the things that was stressed upon us that we were ambassadors to the community. What they wanted to do again was to improve the Army's image and show that women could do the job as well as men. And the purpose for women in the Army during World War II was to do the functions or the administrative functions and release the men for warfare. That was not too popular with the guys, but that's the way it rolled. And as I said, that experience was good. And one of the things that was most amazing was that we were accepted well, for the most part, by the local communities. And that's about, basically in brief, about what I can say. And yes, that was the day room. Yeah. And this is what I liked about this, is because we did, and this is in 57, and when I came here in 63, they did a little more improvement. They had like a stereo, but and so our living quarters were very well, because basically the lower, the E1s and E3s, or up to E4s, that would be your privates and would be equivalent to a corporal, were in the upstairs, and that was the Bay Area. However, they kind of, again, they blended it in where you still had the atmosphere of the Army, but a little bit of humanization to show that they made you feel feminine. So that was great. And about the best way I could describe the barracks was that they had a room, and they looked a little bit like a California closet. You had where your hats and shoes would go in the upper cabinets, and then you would have the open space for your uniforms. One side would be for military, one side would be for civilian clothing, and then you had drawers. Then for the NCOs, they had the downstairs, and they had large rooms, and this could be really like a little bit apartment where they had the furniture there, and so it was just a little bit more to give you like a perk for being an NCO. And pardon me, the rooms were spacious. The architecture, then again, the living quarters, it was very well maintained, and basically you had the home away from home, and it didn't have that harsh Army, you can see it in here, and this is kind of what's going on. It is Army, you can see where the Army structure, but then you had some of the conveniences of home there, or rather some of the surroundings of home. And then they had a kitchen as well, so you had a lot of women who, they had a lot of activity there, so people could come in and bring their kitchen for the different, or prepare the different meals. So if they had an event or something, there was a kitchen there.
The crowd has been great. Do you have any more questions that anyone would like to ask specifically?
Carole, great talk. I wanted to ask you if you recall meeting any famous military leaders while you were here, or any famous politicians, local or national.
Okay, for famous military people would be Colin Powell.
Oh. What rank was he when you met him?
He was a 4-star general. He had just been assigned to FORSCOM. So he was a 4-star
So
general.
this is right before Desert Shield, Desert Storm then?
A little bit before.
Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
a famous guy, yeah.
Yes, and so basically,
And trailblazer.
yeah, it really was, because basically all I can say is when you meet some people, his presence, great.
And what about the politicians, local or national?
Well, politicians, I didn't meet anybody, and the only thing, and you know this too, Senator Mark Kirk. Okay. Well, and so we all found that out because I talked to people and said, yeah, he's living in Fort Sheridan.
How about Donald Rumsfeld when he was around, or Philip Crane, or any of the governors of Illinois, or Mayor Daley, or anybody like that?
No, I had never met any of them personally, and surprisingly enough, the only person that I did meet was in Ohio, and that was Senator John Glenn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they were here, but they just didn't come to my office for something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to ask about the museum in the tower. Tell us about that.
The museum in the tower, they had the artifacts, and the most, again, the one that stood out the most is the wedding dress of Phil Sheridan and Irene Bucker Sheridan. And basically it was going through a spiral, and they had pictures and one of, like I said, that was basically what I remember. And it didn't stay long because they stayed maybe a couple of months, then they moved. But the one thing I do remember is that when we went to the top of the tower, they had it closed because it was a lot of the birds that nested there. And that was the one thing that I remember. But a lot of the artifacts, it's not really clear to me, but what's sticking out in my mind is because it would be weaponry and whatnot that was there. But at that time, it didn't really register with me.
One more quick question. Where were the Nike missile silos on the base? So where would they have launched from on the base? Where were they kept?
In that part, I don't know, and I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to even try
Does
to.
anybody know?
Yes, it still exists. It's fenced-in area right near the cemetery. Just to the west and north of the cemetery, there's a fenced-in area. That's where they were.
It's a
Wow.
platform.
Yeah.
It's a big parking lot now. You can use Google satellite to see where they used to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, because the ones that they did show were at by the flagpole when I was here, and then they had the cannon. So basically, that was all, because I think at that time when I did come, it was kind of a hush-hush deal.
Obviously.
How was the food here? How was the food here? Is it typical Army food, or did you get some good meals?
The food was okay. And when I was at the, it was Army food.
Cafeteria food.
Yeah.
Just curious if you'd go into Highwood. We've heard stories from the Highwood residents about what it was like having the base here, but what was it like from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, it was okay, because basically what we would do for the most part when I was in the Army, we would go to Great Lakes.
Oh, sure.
Okay, and because we were young, and one of the things, it was the fact that we were under 21, and Highwood was the first wet town when you're coming this way from Chicago, because Evanston was dry, so they didn't go to Evanston and then in Highwood, and so we didn't go there, because basically it was just a thing that we just wanted to stay out of trouble.
Sure. Understandable, yes.
You never went dancing at Scornavacos?
Oh, the Scornavacos had good food.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They had good dancing though, too.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. And but what we did find, though, there were a lot of good restaurants, and especially as a civilian, they had the restaurant row there. So we used to order a lot from the restaurants. Yeah. And the Nightingale was.
Any other questions from our audience?
Where did you live when you were here?
When I lived on post.
You were here.
When I was here, and then when I and then I lived in Highland Park, and I lived on Laurel, but that that was owned by the library, so the library said no more, and then I moved to Waukegan, and then from Waukegan until
It's a little further out.
yeah, so and then when the base closed, then I came back. You know, you mentioned something about Highwood, and my memory just got jogged up again. There were a lot of people that were married that had apartments in Highwood, so it was okay, and it was Highwood was friendly to military people. Yeah, so basically, like I said, it was just the fact that if you were single,
Sure.
you just play safe.
So I know, Carole, you're able to stay around just a little bit after this, but can I ask one sort of final official question? Could we hear from your perspective, what are the things that you remembered most fondly about being at Fort Sheridan?
The most fun, I remembered the people, and we had a sense of camaraderie, and that was good. And one of the things that I was really fortunate to have, I had a lot of good bosses, and that is just measurable because that's what really helped me a lot. And when you have that, and I think the camaraderie is what I miss most of all because it's a different world today than what I grew up in. And again, when people gave their word, that was fine. You knew that they were going to do it. And that is what I remember. And that it doesn't get better.